I came to the beach because I needed to disappear for a while. Not dramatically, just enough to quiet the noise that followed me everywhere else. The sea was calm that morning, stretched wide and gray-blue beneath a pale sky. I took off my shoes and let the damp sand cool my feet, breathing in the sharp scent of salt and freedom. That's when I noticed her. She stood near the water, trousers rolled to her calves, waves brushing her ankles as if they knew her. Her hair moved wildly in the wind, but she didn't try to tame it. She looked like someone who belonged to this place, like the sea had learned her name. When she turned slightly, our eyes met only for a second, but something shifted in my chest, subtle and undeniable. I looked away first. I told myself she was just another stranger on a public beach, that the pull I felt was nothing more than the romance of open water and loneliness. I sat on the sand with a book I didn't read, watching the tide move in slow, steady rhythms. Every so often, I felt her presence, like warmth just outside my reach. She walked past me eventually, close enough that I caught the scent of citrus and sea on her skin. "Cold today," she said, nodding toward the water. "Always," I replied, surprised by how natural my voice sounded. She smiled, soft, genuine, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that simple exchange. Then she continued down the shore, leaving behind footprints the tide was already beginning to erase. I stayed long after she was gone, heart unsettled, fingers brushing grains of sand through my palm. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. But somehow I knew this wasn't the last time I'd see her. The next afternoon, I returned to the beach without admitting to myself why. The sky was brighter, the sea louder, and there she was again, sitting on a smooth rock with a sketchbook balanced on her knees. She looked up the moment I approached, as if she had sensed me before she saw me, and a slow smile curved her lips that made my chest tighten. I sat a short distance away, pretending not to watch as her pencil moved with confidence, capturing the shoreline in quick, sure strokes. After a while, she closed the book and turned fully toward me, the wind playing with her hair. "You came back," she said, not as a question, but as a quiet certainty. I smiled and told her it seemed fair, since she had too. She introduced herself as Mara, her name carried away and returned by the wind, and when I said my own, she repeated it softly, like she wanted to remember the sound. We talked easily then. About where we were from, about how this beach felt different from others, about how some places pull you in without explanation. She opened her sketchbook again and showed me her drawing, the sea, the sky, and two faint figures standing close together, almost touching. "I draw what feels possible," she said, meeting my eyes. The air between us shifted, charged and intimate, and when the wind grew colder, she slipped off her jacket and placed it over my shoulders, her fingers brushing mine for a heartbeat too long. I didn't move away. Instead, I let myself breathe her in, knowing already that whatever this was, it was only just beginning. From that day on, the beach became ours, a quiet agreement we never spoke aloud. We met there each afternoon, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence, listening to the waves crash and retreat like steady breaths. The more time I spent with Mara, the more aware I became of the small things, the way her eyes softened when she laughed, how she tilted her head when she listened, how her presence alone made the world feel less heavy. There was an unspoken closeness between us, but also a careful restraint, as if we were both afraid of moving too fast and breaking something fragile. Our shoulders brushed when we walked, our knees touched when we sat, and each accidental contact lingered longer than it should have. She watched my face when I spoke, her gaze drifting to my lips before quickly returning to my eyes, and every time I noticed, my pulse quickened. One evening, as the sky burned with streaks of orange and rose, we sat side by side near the water, the tide creeping closer to our feet. Her knee rested against mine, warm and steady, and neither of us pulled away. She grew quiet then, her voice softer than the sea when she finally spoke. "Have you ever met someone who makes you feel like the timing is dangerous?" she asked. I didn't pretend not to understand. I nodded, my throat tight, and when she turned to look at me, The distance between us felt suddenly too small and impossibly large at the same time. The wind lifted her hair, the waves roared behind us, and in that charged silence, I realized the space between us was no longer empty, it was full of everything we were too afraid to say. The rain came suddenly, sharp and cold, sending us running toward the small cliff at the edge of the beach. We laughed as we sheltered beneath it, breathless, clothes damp, the air thick with the scent of wet sand and sea. The space was narrow, forcing us close enough that I could feel the warmth of Mara's body despite the chill. She leaned back against the rock, her chest rising quickly, eyes bright from laughter that slowly faded into something quieter. "We keep pretending this isn't happening," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the rain. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, leaving just enough space for her to stop me if she wanted to. She didn't. Our foreheads touched first, a gentle, trembling contact that felt more intimate than any kiss I'd known before. I could feel her breath against my lips, warm and unsteady, and when I finally closed the distance, the kiss was slow and careful, like a question asked without words. Her lips were soft, tasting of rain and salt, and she kissed me back with the same hesitation, the same quiet need. For a brief moment, the world disappeared, the storm, the beach, the fear, and there was only us suspended in that fragile almost. When we pulled away, she rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. That, she whispered, was worth waiting for. After that kiss, the beach no longer felt neutral. It felt alive with memory. Everything between us softened and deepened at once, like the sea learning a new rhythm. We didn't talk about what had happened right away. Instead, we let it exist between us, warm and undeniable. Our conversations grew quieter, more intimate, filled with lingering looks and half-smiles that said more than words ever could. When we walked, our hands brushed often, no longer accidental, fingers grazing just enough to promise more without claiming it. One evening, as the tide rolled in slowly, we sat wrapped in a shared blanket near the water, the sky dimming into shades of blue and gold. Mara leaned into me without hesitation, her head resting against my shoulder as if it had always belonged there. I felt the steady rise and fall of her breathing, the quiet trust in the way she let herself relax against me. She traced slow, absent lines along my arm with her fingertips, each touch sending a gentle shiver through me. I turned my head slightly, pressing a kiss into her hair, and she responded by lifting her face toward mine. This kiss was different, deeper, surer, unafraid. It wasn't rushed or desperate, it was deliberate, as if we were both learning the shape of something real. When our lips parted, she stayed close, her forehead against my collarbone. "I don't want this to disappear," she murmured. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her there as the waves whispered beside us. "Then let's stay," I said, more honestly than I'd ever spoken before. The tide crept closer, the night settling around us, and in that quiet closeness, I understood that intimacy wasn't just in the kiss, it was in choosing not to pull away. The days that followed unfolded gently, as if the beach itself was careful with us. We talked more now, but not about the kiss, not directly. Instead, we shared pieces of ourselves in quieter ways. We spoke about childhood summers, about cities that never quite felt like home, about the strange courage it took to admit wanting something you couldn't fully name. Mara listened the way people rarely do, with her whole body turned toward me, eyes steady, presence complete. Sometimes she reached for my hand while I spoke, grounding me, her thumb brushing slow, reassuring circles against my skin. Each touch felt intentional, intimate without urgency. One evening, we lay side by side on the sand, jackets folded beneath our heads, the sky stretched wide and scattered with early stars. Our shoulders pressed together, close enough that I could feel her warmth seep into me. She turned her head toward mine, her breath soft against my cheek. "I'm usually careful," she said quietly. "I leave before things can root." I smiled at the confession, recognizing myself in it. "Me too," I admitted. The honesty settled between us, heavy and tender. I lifted my hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face, my fingers lingering near her temple. She closed her eyes briefly, leaning into the touch, and the simple gesture felt more intimate than any kiss. When she opened her eyes again, they were softer, unguarded. She kissed me then. Slow, unhurried, full of meaning rather than heat, and rested her forehead against mine afterward. We stayed that way for a long time, breathing together, the sea murmuring beside us. In that closeness, I realized some connections didn't need grand declarations. Some truths were best spoken in shared silence, in hands held a little tighter, in the quiet decision to stay present just a moment longer. The storm arrived the same way our feelings had quiet at first, then all at once. The sky darkened without warning, wind sweeping across the beach, lifting sand and sending the waves crashing harder than before. We ran, laughing and breathless, toward the small cottage she'd rented nearby, our clothes damp, hair tangled, hearts racing. Inside, the world felt suddenly smaller, warmer, charged with something unspoken. Rain hammered against the windows as we stood facing each other, neither of us moving, as if one step might change everything. Mara reached for me first, her hands warm and steady despite the tremor in her breath. She didn't rush. She simply rested her forehead against mine, her thumbs brushing my wrists, grounding me. When she kissed me, it was deeper than before, not urgent, but certain, full of all the restraint we'd been holding on to. I kissed her back, slowly, carefully, my hands resting at her waist, feeling the reassurance of her presence. The kiss lingered, unhurried, until we were both smiling softly against each other's lips. We pulled back just enough to breathe, staying close, her arms sliding around me as if it was the most natural thing in the world. We sat together on the small sofa, wrapped in blankets, her head resting on my chest, my arm around her shoulders. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, everything felt strangely calm. I traced gentle lines along her arm, and she pressed a quiet kiss against my collarbone, a simple, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. In that moment, there was no fear of what came next, no need to define anything. There was only the warmth between us, the steady rhythm of our breathing, and the understanding that whatever this was, it had already changed us, softly, deeply, and without asking permission. Morning arrived quietly, as if it didn't want to disturb what we had found. Soft light slipped through the thin curtains, settling gently across the room and across Mara's face as she slept beside me. We were fully dressed, close but careful, the kind of closeness that felt chosen rather than accidental. I watched the slow rise and fall of her breathing, struck by how peaceful she looked, how safe the moment felt. For once, my mind wasn't racing ahead. It stayed right there with her. When she stirred, her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light, and then she smiled, warm, unguarded, unmistakably for me. She shifted closer, resting her head against my shoulder, her hand finding mine without hesitation. Our fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had learned each other overnight. We didn't speak at first. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. I pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, lingering just long enough to make her hum softly, content. Outside, the storm had washed the world clean. The air felt new, and so did we. Mara turned toward me then, her knee brushing mine, her gaze steady and calm. "Stay with me today," she said quietly, not demanding, just hopeful. Something in her tone loosened a knot inside me. I nodded, smiling before I could overthink it. She leaned in and kissed me slow, lingering, full of morning warmth rather than urgency. It wasn't a kiss fueled by uncertainty anymore. It was one that promised continuation. We sat together by the window after, wrapped in shared quiet, watching clouds drift apart to reveal blue sky. Her head rested against my shoulder, my arm around her waist, and for the first time in a long while, staying felt easier than leaving. The beach waited for us beyond the door, but for that moment, the world was perfectly contained right there, in soft light, intertwined hands, and the quiet certainty that this was only the beginning. The beach felt different that day, as if it knew we had crossed some quiet threshold. We walked side by side along the shoreline, close enough that our arms brushed with every step, our hands occasionally finding each other without thought. The sand was cool beneath our feet, firm where the waves had just retreated, leaving behind a smooth, shining surface. Mara stopped once, tugging me gently back, and pointed to the ground where our footprints ran together for a while before blurring into one. "They never last," she said, not sadly, just thoughtfully. I looked up at her, at the soft seriousness in her eyes, and realized how much I wanted this, to last, to matter, even if it changed shape. We sat near the water, knees touching, and talked about what waited beyond this place: responsibilities, distance, lives already in motion. The conversation could have felt heavy, but somehow it didn't. She reached for my hand as she spoke, grounding the uncertainty with warmth and presence. When I leaned in and kissed her, it was gentle and lingering, full of reassurance rather than fear. She smiled against my lips before resting her forehead against mine, breathing me in. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I'm glad it was you." The words settled deep, steadying me. We stayed there until the sun dipped lower, painting the sea in gold and violet, her arm around my waist, my head against her shoulder. Even as the tide erased our footprints, I understood something important. Some connections didn't need permanence to be real. They lived on in the way they changed you, in the courage they left behind. And as we walked back together, hand in hand, I knew this beach would always remember us, even if the sand did not. The last evening arrived with a soft, melancholic glow, the kind of light that made everything feel both fragile and eternal. Mara and I walked along the shoreline one final time, our hands intertwined, the cool waves brushing our feet as if marking the end of something precious. The air was heavy with unspoken words, the kind that hover between hearts when neither wants to let go. We stopped near the water's edge, turning to face each other. She reached up, brushing a damp strand of hair from my face, her fingers lingering at my cheek. Her eyes, deep and unguarded, searched mine as if memorizing each line, each shadow, each smile. "I wish this didn't have to end," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to steady it. I cupped her face in my hands, holding her steady, anchoring myself in the moment. "Goodbyes don't have to be endings," I said softly. "We'll find each other again." Her lips met mine in a kiss, slow, deliberate, and tender, more intimate than any we had shared before. It was a promise, a memory, a pledge that this connection would survive the miles and months that awaited us. She pressed her forehead to mine afterward, lingering, as if storing the moment between us. We walked together to the small station nearby, silent mostly, letting our hands speak what words could not. Before stepping onto the train, Mara pulled me close one last time. Our kiss this time was deeper, yet soft, a mixture of longing and reassurance. "Find me," she said against my lips. "I will," I promised, feeling the certainty in my chest. The train moved forward, and though the distance grew, I carried her warmth with me. Each wave we had watched together, each sunset, each kiss lingered in my memory like a soft echo. The beach, with its restless tide and endless horizon, had given us something beyond time, a connection that could survive any goodbye. And as I watched her disappear into the crowd, I realized that this was not an ending at all. Months had passed, each day marked by Mara's absence and the echo of our last kiss. The city felt colder without her, the routines heavier, the memories sharper. But the beach called me back, the way some places call to the heart when it's ready to remember what truly matters. I returned alone, the familiar scent of salt and wet sand greeting me like an old friend. The waves moved as they always had, relentless and patient, and I let my feet sink into the sand, following the shoreline as if it might lead me to something I hadn't dared to hope for. And then I saw her. She was standing near the water, sunlight glinting off her hair, the same calm, confident presence that had drawn me to this place months before. My breath caught in my chest. She turned at the sound of my approach, and the moment our eyes met, it was as if no time had passed at all. The wind carried the faint scent of citrus and salt, hers, and it felt like coming home. We didn't rush forward. We closed the distance slowly, savoring each step, letting the anticipation build instead of forcing it. When our hands finally met, it was electric and familiar, and her smile broke across her face, lighting the space between us. "I wondered when you'd come back," she said, her voice soft but filled with relief. "I had to," I replied, my heart full. I couldn't stay away. We walked together along the shore, fingers interlaced, the waves lapping at our feet, carrying away the months of absence and filling the space with a quiet understanding. Then, as if the beach itself approved, we stopped. She turned to me, her hands framing my face, and kissed me, not tentative, not hesitant, but fully, completely, with all the months of waiting, longing, and unspoken promises behind it. The tide, the sand, the sun, it all faded away. There was only us and the undeniable truth that some stories, some loves, are meant to find their way back, no matter how far they drift. We stood at the water's edge, the beach stretching endlessly on either side, the sky painted in shades of gold and lavender. The sea whispered against the sand, gentle and steady, like it had always known we would return. Mara's hand found mine again, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. We didn't speak at first, letting the waves and wind carry the unspoken words between us. Everything felt familiar and new at the same time. Like stepping into a memory that had been waiting to be rewritten. She turned to me, her eyes soft and luminous, and smiled. I could see the same wonder I'd felt months ago, but now layered with relief, certainty, and joy. "I thought about this moment," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Every day." I pulled her closer, my forehead resting against hers. "Me too." The beach kept me honest. It made me realize what I was willing to wait for. The wind tangled our hair, the sun glimmered across the water, and when our lips met, it was like returning home after a lifetime away. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and all-encompassing, holding the memory of our first meeting, the stormy afternoons, the whispered confessions, and the quiet nights beneath the stars. It was the culmination of months of longing, and yet it felt like a beginning. We pulled back just enough to look at each other, smiles spreading across our faces, hearts steady in the certainty of now. The beach, which had witnessed our hesitations and first touches, our laughter and silences, seemed to sigh along with us. Every wave that broke against the shore carried away the remnants of fear and doubt, leaving only the truth we had discovered together. "This is where I found you," I whispered. "And this time," she replied, pressing her lips gently to mine, "I'm not letting you go." The tide lapped at our feet, the wind tousled our hair, and the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the water.